thank you all for coming. It really does mean a lot for you to be here. And the thing I had written down as a prompt for me to sit with regards to this was what what idea do you want to share? And as I sat with that, I could feel my intellect really itching to get involved in all that, and like an excitable child in a classroom waving its hand around at me, going, me, pick me. And the thing that I wanted to do was to, first of all, come up with the definition. What is an idea? And I'm like, okay, so what do I think an idea is? And for me, an idea is just a new thought. It's just something that I'm seeing fresh. And I got curious that went, well, if that's what I think of that in the modern day, as is that what's throughout history? That is that what people have always thought of an idea as? So off I trotted to go and look up the history of the word idea. And there's deep roots to that one. And I apologize to anybody with Greek heritage because I'm probably about to butcher a word here. But one of the words there was the Greek word "ideon." Ideon, I think it's probably pronounced, which means to see. And that fits with me, how I think of an idea. I've certainly had new thoughts where I've seen something. Sometimes those are things that are really small. And then there's other times where I've seen something where my whole world has changed. Let me give you an example. When I was little, I couldn't talk proper. So when I went to school at the age of 4, I had to go off and see a speech therapist. And that speech therapist taught me to think about what I wanted to say before I said it, think about how that would sound and how those sounds were formed. And it obviously worked because, you know, I can now speak properly and most of the time people can understand. And I was signed off by the end of the academic year for that. But either nobody said to me or I didn't hear it that you don't have to do that anymore. You've got that skill. So to little 4-year-old me didn't know about what I know as an adult about how we learn things, how we go through that conscious competent stage where you have to think about a new skill as you're learning it. And then you naturally just forget without paying any attention and go into the unconscious competent stage. 4-year-old me didn't know that. So I thought I had to keep doing that. For me, I thought because I'd taken longer to learn to talk, that meant there was something different with me, something wrong, something broken. That was my evidence for that. So I kept doing it. And it meant that I thought that I had to really focus if there were certain words that I'd stumble over, like shoulder or soldier. And there are some words that no matter how much I focused on and really paid attention and practiced, I just couldn't say at all, like ombudsman, which admittedly doesn't often come up in a lot of everyday conversation, unless you happen as an adult to go and join the corporate world as a trainer in a regulated industry where you have to roll out training which focuses on the complaint process, which really has a big focus on the ombudsman's role. And I learned ways of working around that because there was something wrong with me. So I had to find my way around doing it in my head. So with regards to the ombudsman, my sessions for that were more interactive than the other trainers because everybody had to say that word for me when we got to that bit of the process because I couldn't say it. And it could have its benefits because with that one, I then had the data to show, well, my delegates could remember the whole process and how ombudsmen were involved in it because they'd had that interactivity. But I still thought that that was just my lucky chance of how I had to be different with that. So why am I giving backstory with that one? Well, one day I was in a training as a delegate doing an exercise. I can't remember what the exercise is now, but I was doing it with a friend. I do remember it was fun. And in my head, it was quieter than normal. And all of a sudden, I just noticed this new thought that just went, what if you taking longer to learn to talk just meant you took longer to learn to talk? And I could suddenly see that I had so much weight on that. I hadn't got any other weight on other things that I'd learned to do. I didn't have any particular thinking about how long I'd learned to learn to count, or there were things I'd learned to do, like stand on one leg, that I didn't even remember learning to do at all. So why would it matter how long it had taken me to learn to talk? Why would that be different? And in that moment, it was one of those. Going to come up with a really niche reference here. So, if anyone remembers the 80s British kids TV show, The Adventure Game, if not, think Star Trek transporter beams. But at the end of that, there was like this invisible vortex. And it was like I'd stumbled into this invisible vortex, been totally disintegrated into formlessness momentarily, and then been come back and formed again. So that outside, the room I was in looked the same. The people around me sounded the same. But to me, inside my head, it just seemed so different. It was like it was a new world for me. And I could suddenly find that I could say shoulder and soldier without having to focus on it. I could say ombudsman. Annoyingly, I was no longer a trainer, so it didn't matter as much. But it was curious that I hadn't had to have a 10-step program to go through to do that. I hadn't had to do something for 21 days and form it as a habit and really work hard on it. All it had taken was that one fresh thought to see that new world. And I'm quite good at being self-judgmental and self-critical. I think if that was an Olympic sport, I'd stand a really good chance at times of being on the medal podium. Maybe some of you would also have been my competitors for that one. But even I couldn't find it in me to be angry or cross or disappointed in that 4-year-old me who'd had that innocent misunderstanding that I'd never thought to question along the way. It just seemed that that was true. And yet, when I had that new thought, I got really curious then about where that thought had come from, because it didn't feel like it had come from me. If anything, it felt like it had come through me. It had that sense of massiveness, that was something bigger than me, that stillness and peace, that that sense of safety and love around it where it'd come from, like being wrapped in a duvet of love. Um, that place, which reminds me so much of when like writers talk about uh, just being in the flow of how they're working, or runners talk about, oh, they just found their natural stride and it doesn't seem like it's like that's going any different to normal. It just seems like that's how they're doing. Maybe you've seen it in the eyes of a baby or a puppy or a kitten there. I mean, for some people, they find it really easy to have that feeling when they're in nature, sat by water, or they found it that that's they get lost in music or in that moment. And there's a clarity and resonance to it. And I mentioned earlier about looking at the history of the word of the idea. And back in the 14th century, the word idea actually meant a concept of a thing in the mind of God. Which, when I read that, I went, oh, wow. Because that for me, when that new thought comes from that space, I know people can have a lot of thinking around the word God. But for me, that's what I was pointing to. And whether you use that or something like wisdom or intuition or universe, stillness, presence, that to me is what what I was pointing at. And I don't think it necessarily matters what it is that you call it. It's just having that awareness that the possibility is there for you to touch it. The possibility is there for a new thought to for it to arrive to whenever that actually comes. So my invitation to you is this: just take a moment to settle as best you can and ask yourself gently, what's one fresh new thought that could change your world? Now, you may not get an answer straight away. I don't think these things have a habit of turning up by a schedule or by clock. It'd be really nice if it was, but I don't think that's how it works. But I have noticed it does tend to show up when you know that the possibility of that's there for it to turn up from. So the idea that I'd love to share is just that idea of possibility, the possibility that at any point a new thought can emerge from out of that space and that it can be available to every single one of us if we let it. Thank you.